Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Legal Unicorns, the podcast where we interview the new leaders in the African legal markets. And we're delighted today to be joined by Miles Ollyn, who is our first ever guest from the beautiful country of Botswana. And Miles joins us today from Gaborone, the capital of Botswana. So welcome, Miles, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Rob, and a very good morning to you and your listenership.
Excellent. Well, look, as we said, I've got two cameras here, so I'm going to be looking at you and looking over here as well. But we're going to get right into it. And as we've just said off camera, you guys up in Botswana, the wonderful country that I have been to once, but I want to come back, have very steady electricity. We, on the other hand, just your neighbours to the south, don't. So if it does go very dark and we lose you, that'll be our fault. But hopefully we don't. But just to give the listeners a little bit of an introduction to Miles and why I've asked him to be a guest on the podcast today. Now, obviously, Botswana is a country that is growing and is changing, and is a country that we, as in myself and our analysts here, look at quite often. It's our neighbouring country to the north. It's a fantastic place to visit, but also economically, it is growing. And it's interesting to have some insight into the legal market. But also, Miles and I first started speaking maybe even a year ago or so, I think, with an introduction, I think, if I'm right, from our mutual friend Rohan from the Law Ninjas Network, if I remember rightly.
That is correct. Yeah.
That's right, yes. And obviously we were delighted to actually have the Law Ninjas team and the summit we ran here in Cape Town last week. So it's all coming together very nicely. But now, before we get into it, I'll give you a little bit of background about Miles. Obviously, there'll be the connection to him on his LinkedIn profile below in the YouTube link anyway. But he's a corporate governance expert, compliance, contract management, people management, board secretarial, legal practitioner with a really wonderful experience in a couple of different industries, but at the moment is working in Botswana tourism. So please, let's plug the country as much as possible because it is a fantastic place to visit. And before that was working in a law group, and I thought, if I remember rightly as well, Botswana Railways as well, which is a vast array of different industries you've worked in. Also a keen interest in people management and culture change within organisations, and as you mentioned before, as well as a husband and a father as well. So they're all the challenges that we have, and that's why I look so tired all the time. But look, Miles, thank you so much for joining today. If we can kickstart a little bit with just a little bit about you and your journey. From school through to your choosing a career in law and some of the other parts of the education you've done, like your EMBA as well. And what's your journey to get you to where you are today?
All right. Thank you again, Rob, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this lovely podcast. Now, I think mine hasn't been a straightforward journey, eh? It really hasn't been a straightforward one, and simply because after I think in South Africa, it's grade 12. This side, we call it Form 5. That's, okay. The stage before you go to tertiary. So, when I started university, law wasn't even in the top 5 of the areas that I had interested in, at least in terms of career-wise. So, I first started, my interest was in aeronautical engineering. So as a prerequisite this side, because we don't have direct entry into that course, you have to do a Bachelor of Science General for at least 1 year. So that's what I enrolled for. But, by the time I finished my first year, this was at the upturn of the economic downturn. So the government, because with us, so I should have mentioned this at the start, with us, tertiary is government sponsorship. For you to go to university, it's through government sponsorship. And with government sponsorship, it comes in two ways. Depending on the field of study you're undertaking, it's either a grant or it's a loan payable after graduation and upon attaining employment. So, fortunately for me, because of the areas of interest that I had, it was a grant. So, after
Sorry, Miles, can I just interject? Sorry, I was just going to ask, just for my own knowledge on that. The grants that are given, are they more for the, should we say, the critical skills areas that the government sort of identifies? Maybe engineering, maybe potentially law, maybe, but maybe the loan is more for the ones that aren't critical. Maybe, is that right?
Absolutely, that is correct, Rob.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, carry on.
All right. Thanks for that. So yeah, after my first year of completion of my Bachelor of Science, I realized, what are the chances of me progressing to get to do what I had a substantive interest in, and that is aeronautical engineering. Very slim. Why? Because at the time, the cumulative GPA that was required was around 4.6 out of 5. So, and that's what government requires you to have, a cumulative GPA of 4.6. I had 4.3, so I did not qualify. As hard as it was, I obviously couldn't lie down and say I'm not going to tertiary anymore. So I had to make a choice. Do I still stick with my BSc and branch into another field of engineering, or go do medicine, or do I go for a completely different field? And that's where law came up. And yeah, at first, I think the first 2 years were really difficult. Why? Because you know what, I'm trying to deal with the disappointment of not getting to do what I really wanted to do, and trying to adjust to this very theoretical field of study. So, first 2 years were a struggle, but by the time I had to go to my third year, plus again, I had my parents that I was living with, so they were really not happy with my grades and my interest in law. So you can imagine the constant bashing and criticism. Pick up your grades, show more interest, more enthusiasm in what you're doing. So it all caught up by the third year, starting to enjoy law. Plus, that's when the practical bits came in. With the way our degree in law is structured is such that by the time you go to fourth year, you are given a period of 6 months on attachment to an entity, organization, or law firm of your choice, of your choosing. So that's what I, fourth year, went on internship. Actually went on internship very far away from the city. That is around 5 hours in a city called Francistown. So that's where I did my internship.
Okay.
Yeah, and then after those 6 months were done, I realized, hey, you know what? There's more to law than there is with these huge law reports and hundreds of precedents that you have to go through and hundreds of statutes that you have to understand. There's more to it. There's actually some aspect of social justice that can come out of this. So by the time I finished with law in fifth year, yeah, I was in song, in tune, and ready to get started. So that's pretty much my preliminary years up until I graduated with my degree. So
Yeah, I think that sort of is it's something that resonates with me. I think when I was at university, I think I got to the end of my fifth year as well, and I was ready to just say goodbye to some books and say hello to working and making some money. So I feel you there. But from that point, you saying that after that you already connected to a law firm potentially, is that right?
yeah, no, actually, I wasn't.
Ah,
It was quite interesting. The market here, Rob, unlike most countries and just like most of the developing countries, it's quite small. It's quite small. So you find that in order to get that big breakthrough to an elite law firm or to one of those top entities, organizations, one, you should have, at least throughout your study, have been affiliated to them, or your grades should have been so high that you know what, it's them coming after you and not the other way around. So I won't say I was unfortunate, because the way things panned out was quite fortunate. So I was fortunate enough not to have enrolled to an A-League law firm or one of these top organizations. So yeah, because I couldn't get a job in the capital city, I had to look elsewhere. And again, Francistown came calling, which is around a 5 to 6 hour drive from the capital city. Went there in a relatively small firm, one man show. I think his total staff complement before I got there was 3 employees. It was him, the sole attorney and managing partner. He had a messenger and a secretary. So I joined the team. There were 4 of us. I worked for him for around 8 months or so, and then fortunate enough to get an opportunity in the capital city. So after around 6 months or to 8 months thereabout, got an opportunity to come to this capital city, joined a different law firm, a bit bigger. They had a staff count of around 10 at the time, and
Yeah.
more diverse in terms of the portfolio and the nature of the work that they were handling. So and then stayed with them for around 18 months as well. And then boom, there came the biggest breakthrough of my career so far, especially given where I was coming from. It's a multiverse law firm, but generally they specialize in corporate and debt collection. Yeah, that's where we are. I don't know, Rob. Should I mention the names of the previous employers or not?
Well, I mean, people will find you on LinkedIn, so they'll be able to put it together. So I'm just thinking, I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile here as I'm listening to you, and it shows there the Francistown, Mokorby and Partners, and then into Gaborone, excuse my pronunciation, but Khagladua Law Chambers, and then Ramalepa attorneys as well, where I guess that's where you say you spent 18 months, is it?
Yeah, so now Ramalepa Chinese is where I finally got that big break into what you can say one of the A-list firms in the country. So yeah,
Okay.
that's where I got my big breakthrough. And with Ramalepa Chinese, because of the portfolio of clientele and the nature of the work that they did, that's where I sparked the interest of Botswana Railways, and that was my first corporate gig. And
Okay, can I just ask, just because obviously a lot of our listeners are people at the beginning of their careers. You know, a lot of people will watch this that are in Botswana and South Africa and other parts of Africa as well, where they're either still studying or they're at that level of going into become a lawyer or take their first position outside of their articles or whatever it may be. But what it sounds like to me is that you were prepared to move out of, obviously the passion and the idea was to be in Gaborone and in the big city where things are happening. But you were prepared to go outside and go 6 hours drive away to start that career. But on that note, were you still looking at Gaborone going, I want to get back there one day?
oh, definitely, Rob. That was always at the back of my head because I took that moving away as an opportunity to not only prove my capability, but also show that the passion is there. The passion is certainly is there. It's one thing to have ability, but what about the passion and commitment to get the work done? So I use that as a stepping stone and a platform in order to upgrade professionally. So plus, it's the capital city. That's where the money was, and that's where the money is. So
Exactly.
I had to.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't stay out of town for that long. So yeah.
Get me back there.
Yeah, thank you.
No,
Thank you.
I can, that your story really resonates with me because, obviously quite a few years ago now, I did something fairly similar. I was born and bred in London, but I couldn't get a job in London. So I had to get a job outside, which meant that when I was on the train going in a different direction to everyone commuting into the big city. But in the back of my head, I always had that, I want to get back there. I want to get back into London. And that's where the money is and that's where it is. So I remember when, probably about a similar time, if I look at your career on LinkedIn there, just in terms of a couple of years, and then the opportunity comes in. And I remember saying to a recruiter, I just want to get back into London. I want to be in London and I want to be working hard and making money. So your story resonates with me as well. So, but that's what it will also resonate with a lot of listeners who are thinking if they can't get a job in Gaborone or Johannesburg or or Windhoek or where I'm particularly picking the areas just very close to us here, but that's all is not lost is the term I was looking for. You will get there if you keep going with the prize, but you. And then you moved into the corporate space with Botswana Railways, yeah.
Yeah. So and one of the things I was thankful for, because most of the chaps that I went to school with, the first thing that they did post admission was corporate. They went corporate, and to a certain degree, it had its disadvantages because at least from where I stand and what I believe in is that having worked in private practice, it gave you that holistic picture and appreciation of issues, and not just from a corporate background, because it gives you the opportunity to investigate the issue from the root cause. When you get an instruction, for example, most corporates outsource their matters. And because they outsource their matters, they outsource them to private firms or these law firms, right? And that's where the crunch of the work is done. And what you get is, at least from a corporate level, is a general understanding of that field of law or that area where an issue or an instruction is coming from. But once you're at a law firm, you need to crunch literally from the ground all the way to the time you issue an opinion or you get a judgment for your client. So I was happy that at least I got to do the groundwork, such that when I went to corporate, things were a whole lot easier because I had a fair understanding of what the law was, what the issues were, and how to apply them, at least from a corporate level. Because whilst I was a private practice, at least there were one or two entities that we represented that gave me that exposure to have an understanding of what the corporate sector was like. So yes, there was Botswana Railways. Spent quite a considerable amount of time, longer than I had intended, but it was engaging. It was engaging. There came Botswana Railways. Did close to 5 years with them, and there was a vast portfolio, not just transport. I think one of the things that people will look at from Botswana Railways, and what you'll get even if you go to one of their websites or social media platforms, is that it comes across as just rail transportation, but it's such a vast field. They are into property. They have a dry port in Walvis Bay in Namibia, our neighboring countries, and then they are into logistics as well, and not just rail. They have transport companies that it's a courier service, in short. So they are a vast portfolio, and you can imagine, and there are 5 subsidiaries that the company has, and managing those plus your parent company duties, it gave me a whole lot of exposure and the ability to comprehend so much, not just from a corporate setup. So yeah, that was Botswana Railways.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating, and as I said at the beginning, we first came into contact when you were still with Botswana Railways, which was up until late last year anyway. So, but it is a fascinating organisation, isn't it? Because I think we have forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing it's a state-owned enterprise. Is it a state-owned?
It is.
Or is it private? It's state-owned, yeah. So very similar to here, where we have Transnet, and which obviously has its well-documented issues. But once you look into the group as a whole, once you scratch the surface, and I'm sure Botswana Railways is exactly the same, and you've just touched on it there, they own a vast array of property, because the railway network is on land, and the railway stations and that kind of thing. Then you've got the logistics, and you've got the engineering capabilities. You mentioned the connection with Walvis Bay in Namibia, and I think that rail network is coming together, isn't it, from Botswana to Namibia to the ports, isn't it? So that's something that's been something that's been worked on for a long time. Yeah. So it is and I think one of the other things that you've touched on there, which a lot of lawyers, until they've done it, don't really appreciate, is you had that skill where you did you sort of cut your teeth, as it were, on in the private practice space, where you have a lot of different client challenges. You have a book of clients. Every firm is slightly different. You have to. So I think that's a very good grounding before you go into corporate. Would you agree?
I definitely, you hit the nail on the head right there, Rob. It definitely was. You can say, you know what most people will call grinding. I had to grind just to get here, and it was a very good lesson, very good opportunity. I can't complain.
Yeah, of course. And it gives you that appreciation of both sides, doesn't it? Before you go into the client side, which you then, when you joined Botswana Railways, and as you said, you were with them for nearly 5 years, but at the same time you worked your way up, took and got given a number of promotions, obviously, which is great, all the way up to General Counsel and Board Secretary, with the lovely progression throughout your career. So you've seen it in the team and then you've led the team. Now that takes me up from a career perspective, before we get back into you, but up until late last year, where you did a small stint at a law group before moving into Botswana tourism.
Yeah.
And where, according to LinkedIn, you have been for 2 months, since the beginning of January. So how are you finding it? How are you finding a new challenge as corporate legal counsel at Botswana Tourism? It's a beautiful place, so I know you're inundated with visitors. Please tell us about that as a challenge from a career perspective.
Okay. Thanks for that, Rob. When I left Botswana Railways, there was that transition phase, right? And and one of the things that I had to deal with and try comprehend in between the two jobs was, do I really have it in me? Do I still have it in me to go private practice? So I before I committed to the role that I am right now, I used that phase in order to, let's see if there's still that spark in me to be able to execute what I have to do in private practice. And I must say the transition was quite hard. It really was quite hard. I mean, having been on the client side for so long and then having to sit now on the private practice side for that amount of time, I think it was hard, but it was not undoable. So it was it brought me back. It was more of a me reminiscing, right? It brought me back to the early formative days after graduation and trying to get that next big job. And I must say, it was a nice period, but would I want to do it long term? No. I think that moment in time or that transition period just showed me that no, I'm still not there yet. Corporate is where I want to be. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I know, obviously, I've worked with senior lawyers like yourself for over 2 decades now, and so I've seen it a number of times where there's that transition period where people are thinking, should I go back into practice? Is it something I want to do? And if you hadn't have done it, then you might have always been wondering, mightn't you? So it's nice that you had that few months where you went back in, you saw what it's all about. I guess whilst the job itself hasn't changed much in practice, the environment changes somewhat. So going back and then into corporate will give you an appreciation what some of the practice lawyers you might use are going through these days. So it's a good experience.
It certainly was a good experience. And like you're saying, the modalities of going about it may have not changed, but the landscape has significantly changed from where I left it 7 years ago. Because now, and I think that's one of the challenges you'll find with our market here, because we have a relatively small market. There's only so much of the pie that you can cut and eat. So, and I think one of the most significant limitations, and this is one of the things that I got to realize once during that transition phase, was that there's such an upshoot of law firms that it's not funny. I mean, when I graduated, the market was already small. You can imagine 8, 9 years later, it's not like it has really, the number of corporate entities or the amount of population that is exposed to it's not as developed as you could say in South Africa. We are not a litigious generation or a litigious country. So And now I think the biggest frustration, which we'll get on later on, is just how much growth there isn't with those firms or those corporations. Hence the reason why we are having so many law firms that are opening up. Literally every month you have a new firm popping up. So it's unhealthy competition. It's unhealthy competition in the
Yeah.
sense that now you have a situation whereby you have 10 people competing for one client. And Rob, I'm talking about a
Yeah.
population of just under 2.3 million. You go to a capital city that
Yeah.
relatively has around 700,000 people or so. It's mad. It's mad. So yeah, that period really, it was like an eye opener. That no, this one.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I think that is, well, I know for a fact that is not just unique to Botswana. It's happening here. It's happening across many of the other African nations that we work with, and across the world as well. It's the market itself, the pie, if you like, isn't getting any bigger, but but the law firms are getting splintered, and there's more and more one man, one woman bands being set up, and it's just becoming a real splintered market. It's interesting you say it's happening in Gaborone as well, because there's only two ways this can go. Well, there's only one way it's likely to go, and there's going to be two big impacts. That it only needs one half decent lawyer or law firm to dramatically reduce their fees,
Yeah.
and then everyone's going to have to do the same thing, and then it becomes a race to the bottom, and that is a huge concern, or should be a huge concern.
Definitely.
And also the advent of technology, and I'm not just going to throw AI out there because obviously everybody thinks it's super cool, but it's more about how that is. How the tools that are being created for the law market now, how they are interpreted and adopted. And the law firms that don't utilize technology will go by the wayside, but at the same time, technology will level the playing field for people with smaller companies and smaller teams to compete with the bigger guys, because they'll all have the same technology. So I can only see it splintering even more, like you say, and it's unhealthy competition is the term you use there, and I think that is an excellent term to use, because it is a concern, because if it's not kept, if it goes too far, then you lose the quality, right? Especially if the prices go down.
Exactly.
And that is a concern in terms of the quality of law that's available in a growing market like Botswana. Now, it's interesting. I was wondering just while you were talking there what the population was, and you mentioned around 2.3 million, which I assume is growing quite a lot, and 700,000 in the capital. Has that seen much growth over the last 5 years? Can you feel the growth in the population, or and the eyes coming in from foreign investment and things like that? Is that something you feel on the ground?
I won't say it's rapid. It's been steady. It's been steady growth, and like I said, that's one of the limitations of our market, is that over the past 5 years, in fact, the last population census, I think, was around 10 years back, 10, 11 years back. And during those 10 years, I think our population has grown by around 500,000. So you can say
steady.
it's steady. It's steady. And again, because of that, and as an investor, one of the things that you want, or one of the key areas that you look into, is market uptake. And with the relatively low population that we have, there's only so much that you can do, right? And talking of that, Rob, it's a limitation on our end. And that is why you have so few sectors that have such a huge amount of foreign direct investment. And tourism is one of those. Tourism is one of those because it's such a niche market. And the way our tourism sector has been put is such that it's low volume but high capital. You get it? High income but low volume.
Yeah.
Because you'd go up in the Delta or in the Chobe area, that is up north in the country. That's most of where your rich tourism areas are. And unlike South Africa, you have tens and tens of millions of people. Relatively get around a few 10,000s, but the amount of revenue that you get from those few 10,000s is what's driving the foreign direct investment. And then another space is technology. As with most developing countries, I think in terms of the technological landscape, we are relatively not the best. I think that's the most politically correct way to put it. We are not the best. The infrastructure might be there, but again, is there a market for it? That's the biggest challenge. So,
Yeah,
and I think COVID did show us.
that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been lucky enough to, with my family, to go to Botswana once on a holiday, and it was amazing. And it was just as you described there. It's, you know, high end, very high end, beautiful, very special place to go on a safari or you know, or to go on holiday in general. And long may Botswana, and obviously you'll have a big part in that with Botswana tourism. So please keep it like that. You know, higher. Once you go for the volume, and I've seen this, right, because I spent nearly a decade living in Asia, so I've seen the markets in Asia that have gone for high-end special and have done very well, and I've seen those that have gone for mass market, and in particular you could think of Thailand and Bali and places like that, and it's not, it doesn't make that locals very happy. It doesn't create a good space for the environment to thrive. You know, it doesn't necessarily bring money. It brings a lot of problems, is what it usually brings. But just in terms I just want to change direction slightly, just on that, because that is fascinating. But I want to get back to you now. You've sort of touched on it briefly when you were saying about studying and living with your parents, you mentioned in some of the notes that you're the oldest of three. You've got other siblings, obviously. Tell us about that environment. Just remind me. Did you grow up near the capital city or in the capital? Where were you when? And your parents, what sort of impact? And the family, are you all still close and still striving for greatness? What does it look like in terms of your upbringing?
Okay. Yes, definitely. I grew up in the capital city. My parents have been based there for pretty much for as long as I do remember. And even where they were posted or working either outside the country or far from the capital city, but growing up, I've always been stationed in the capital city. And as I had indicated earlier, or sorry, as you had just stated, I'm the oldest of three. I have two younger sisters. And I think one of the reasons why my parents were so hard on me, it was that, you know what, at the end of the day, you are the one who's setting the example here. And if we do not make it with you, you can only imagine what kind of example will be set for those that follow you. So,
Yeah.
and I think
The pressure of the oldest sibling.
of course, of course. So it was hard. It was hard because at that age, you really don't understand why these people are making such a fuss out of it. But as you grow up, and I think upon completing my degree, one of the things that I decided was a factor in me moving out to get a job is because I couldn't afford staying home. And, you know, when my sisters come from school, they find me home saying, you know what, I'm waiting for a job. I'm waiting for a job. I had to take that initiative. And was it a good thing? It was a beautiful thing. I moved away from family. It was painful, but the rewards and of the commitment that I made, because like as you had stated earlier, Rob, I always wanted to come to the city, and that was the driving force. I want to come back to the city, and you can see it. I think with my sisters, that commitment, that zeal, that ability to get things done, even in the hardest of challenges, is what has rubbed off on them. And I think they are coming up quite well. They are coming up quite well. Both of them have started tertiary. So, yeah. And how was it being away? It was not nice. It really wasn't nice. But I knew it was only a matter of time before I got back. So, but like you're saying, it's one of those challenges that you go through, but can only make you stronger and better as a person. So yeah, I'm thankful for the experience.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. And it sounds like you have a lovely close family as well, and you know, all of you pushing each other, but in the right way, as it were, and setting examples, and that's good. And I know from our notes, sort of pre-show notes, we've actually touched on a couple of things already that you said were sort of defining moments in your career that attribute to your success. We've actually mentioned them already, but I do think for the listeners, it's worth noting, maybe not even just for the younger listeners, it's also for the anybody of any age, is that the fact that you were prepared to take yourself out of your home and move, 6-hour drive away for an opportunity with a smaller firm. It really speaks volumes for you taking a chance, backing yourself and your capabilities, and being prepared to just go, right, I'm going to do this, and then but the goal is to go back over here, and this is part of my journey. And I think, and I don't want to use this as a sweeping statement, but there's a lot of people I come across who aren't always prepared to take themselves out of their comfort zone like that. And I think that speaks volumes for you as a professional and as a man, and it sets a really good tone that you were willing to do that. So, yeah, well done. I'm glad it worked out for you as well. And I think if you're anything like me, that you've got the bright lights of the city in the distance, you're kind of always like, I want to get back there. I want to go. So I'm glad that you did, and it will end up speaking volumes for your sisters and for your kids in the future as well, and those around you will see. Well, you've got to dig deep sometimes, right? You've got to go to somewhere you don't want to go to get to where you want to be. So. In terms of just to stay on you and your career, but one of the other things that I like to ask people is about anything that jumps out of you as sort of notable moments in the workplace that maybe have shaped you or navigated you through the corporate space. It can be good or bad. And obviously you spoke to my colleague Tsitsi about, or you mentioned in the notes about your time referring to working with your mentor. Would you like to give us a little bit more detail about that?
Okay. I think one of those moments, and I think those are some of the things that, Rob, when you either at school or in your formative years of working, it's one of the things that they never really get to teach you. And it's how to deal with people, how to deal with different characters. And, working in a law firm or in an entity where you have 5 or 10 people or a staff complement of 20 to 25, it's easy to deal with because you all know each other, right? And it's easy to study personalities. But now, when you go to a place where there's hundreds of employees, there's tens of executives that you have to deal with, it's just one of those people management. It's not a skill that you're taught. And it comes with a high level of emotional intelligence. And the sad part about it is that I got to learn that the hard way. And I got to learn that the hard way in that you'd get into a boardroom, and one thing they'll tell you is that, which is something that I got to learn as I grew up, was that your friend is the chairman and your best friend is the CEO. Now, why is that? In that you cannot be a board secretary if you do not have some form of relationship with the chairman, because that's the person that directs the board and the proceedings generally in the direction of the entity. And then the CEO. The CEO is the head of admin. So that's the person who takes after your pay, takes after your package, your whether or not your employment is renewed, the recommendation or not. So exactly, that's one other person that you should have a very close relationship with. Now, as you had stated, I think that the beauty about it, and this is what I'd encourage for those upcoming guys, either at varsity or those that are just starting up their legal careers, is that it's really important to have a mentor that is well, at least exposed to some of these areas, because that gives you an opportunity to learn, at least before the actual experience does come, on how to deal and appreciate these issues. And as you had stated, Rob, I think the first mentor that I had, probably because we come from the same village, was Victor Ramalepa. That's the chap that runs the firm, Ramalepa Attorneys. So that's the man that molded me. And one of the things that he taught me is that, you know what, despite your successes, despite your intellect, you should always be grounded. Humility is a feature, or it's an attribute that not most attorneys have. Because we are pompous, we are arrogant, we feel the you know, the world is an oyster
You
right
can
at
say
our
that. I
fingertips.
won't. You can say that. I'm not going to say that.
So that's one of the things that he did. At least, you know, the exuberance of youth and the reality of life. You have to match the two and come up with a synergy that works for you going forward. And yeah, Vic, I call him Vic. Vic really helped me in terms of that, at least harnessing the talent that was there, but exactly managing the expectations with life. And then, so when I went up through the corporate ladder, I met, at the time, you know, when I joined Botswana Railways, I joined it at the lowest position in terms of the legal section. I joined them as an officer, and I call her Kusi. Kusi was the board secretary at the time and the head of legal. So one of the things that she did was told me, you know what, we believe in your talent, but it's not your talent that God has interested. It's your ability to sit, be calm, and be willing to learn. So and I think for me that was what really was another eye opener. You know what? It's not always talent that will get you to where you are, and I think that's one of the things we should tell up to the upcoming guys and those that advise the team. Talent can only take you so far, but character speaks volumes about who you are and what you can achieve. So
Yeah.
that yeah, she helped me. She molded me as well, and she told me, you know what, you will progress simply because of the way that you relate with people. And again, of course, you can't go into an entity and not know what the law is, or at least have a factual background of what your duty entails. So that's one other lady, and I think she was a mother. She was more of a mother than a boss. And that is what, you know, with Vic and with Kusi, those are the two people that I believe it's the kind of leadership style that I believe works best. That it's the kind of leadership style that helps to get the best out of your team. So yeah, Rob, I think those are the two that I can highlight, and those
Brilliant.
are the two cornerstones and principles that I live by. In we are professionals. We are all qualified in our different assets, but when it comes to work, you should be able to give people that that autonomy to be able to execute what they can. And if anything needs to be addressed, address it like professionals. So yeah, I don't believe in micromanagement. Thank you.
I like it. I really like it. I mean, it's so nice that you had two really powerful influences on your corporate life, in the sense that you know, not just from a technical legal perspective, but also showing you how to be your true self. Because also, you know, they would have seen something in you and your leadership skills that they knew you could cope with extra responsibility. You know, you mentioned in the notes that you were put forward to be promoted there by Kusi, you say, as well when she left. And you know, they, not because, you know, for any other reason, than they feel that you had that character as well, and that you were learning from them, and you were, you know, it's a valuable lesson for everybody to learn, that you can be, that you need, yes, you need to be technically strong as a lawyer to go through it and have a great career, but it's not always about that. It's all about listening, it's about developing, it's about having humility. It's a great word. It's one of our core values here at GRM. We even put it on the website, it's on everything. It's like, be humble. Go through life being prepared to make mistakes,
Exactly.
put your hands up and say, I don't know, show me how to do it. And it sounds like you've got that in abundance, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah.
I want to get onto the sort of what you think in the future of law, and specifically in Botswana as well. I think, you know, you've mentioned there, you know, we're talking about steady growth as an economy and as a population. It's becoming a place that a lot of more people overseas are becoming aware of, not just as a holiday destination, but obviously as an economic, hopefully future economic powerhouse. I mean, you mentioned there about 500,000 in terms of an increase in the population over the last 10, or certainly since the last census.
Yeah.
But as a percentage, that's quite high, isn't it? I mean, that's about 25% there, or give or take. So that's actually significant, isn't it? And I think in terms of the law and company secretarial work in the corporate space, what do you see? Do you see any sort of short-term changes, anything that's out there that you think is going to affect people's careers and their job itself?
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. And as compared to most developed markets, that there's been a threat of AI and your chat GP and whatnot. I think because of our modest uptake of technology, that AI doesn't pose much of a threat, at least in the short term, right? And so where we are as a market legally, and I think this is one of the issues that we touched upon earlier, was that the upshoot of private firms that is just being registered on a monthly or a daily basis, it only goes to dilute the quality that is within this legal space. And I think that's the
Sadly,
biggest
yeah.
challenge that we have. And you'd find that most of these, and I wish this is something that we could adopt from, in America or in the UK or your Canadian practices, that you'd find a law firm that has 5, 6 partners, right? And not 10 law firms. So what we could do, and this is something that I hope is not that there could be a synergy and a consolidation of all these vast skills, such that you don't have 100 law firms, but probably you could have like 40, 30 law firms that would cater to this market, but just have people. Let's put our selfishness aside and our willingness to make money, but rather know that, as a team, you can make more than as one man. Because the problem with being a sole proprietor is that if you are not there, the business stops. And most corporations and most clients want continuity beyond the partner. So the sooner we realize that,
Yeah.
the better it will get for us. So I think that's an opportunity for growth. And then one other thing that I was quite disappointed we did not get to make the most of is that during COVID, what we then realized was that technology works. You'd have a situation whereby most of the proceedings at court or most of the engagements were conducted virtually. That was a platform within which, and that was a wave I wish we rode on, because it would have simplified things. Right now, we have such a huge backlog. I mean, we are in 2024, and if you want a trial date, you're going to get it mid 2026. That's crazy, Rob. That's really
Wow.
crazy, because
That's
one,
crazy.
litigation is expensive. It does not come cheap. And expensive in
Yeah.
the sense that it's not just about money, but the time that you're taking to get matters concluded. That's where the biggest expense is. So one thing I had hoped, at least in terms of the administration of justice, that's the arm of government that's looking at our legal processes. One thing I had hoped was that the administration of justice would take on the recommendations of our law society, that most of these things could be done virtually, because with so many you take away the expense from your client. Your client is the end consumer. What you'd spend 4 or 5 hours going to court for, it's something you can do virtually. Enroll 10 matters, and at the end of the day, we are not doing this as much as it's an economic benefit to us, but at the end of the day, there is that social aspect to it, to better, one, the lives, and two, the relations of the community at large, right? But if we are doing it at such a high cost, what benefit is it to those that we are trying to serve? That's one of the things that we could look at. So
Yeah.
I had hoped by now things would have improved in terms of the technological uptake, but it hasn't. And then another area that I feel we could really, really try to develop, I think, Rob, if you and I are on the same page here, is it 3 or 4 years back, Botswana was grey listed. Grey listed by for lack of a better word, those high-end international financial institutions, right? Reason being that our controls as a country, especially on a compliance perspective, were found wanting. So, so an area that really needs to fast track is in terms of compliance, and regulatory compliance, especially regulatory compliance, because I think most of the things is because of the culture that we have here. We believe in trust, such that you can meet Rob today and give Rob $1,000 tomorrow and have the belief that by a month end he'll return it. But that, the with foreign direct investment and with the influx of the international market, that opens up, and these are loopholes that they can see, right? These are areas that they can see, such that we need to be able to vet one, where we are getting this financial assistance, because there was a point in time where Rob was in tertiary, where you could buy a plot of land, probably your a hectare or so. You could buy it for the equivalent of $3,000, right? But then there was this influx of international
Of
travelers and
course there was.
whatnot. And Rob, I can't even afford to buy a plot at the city center, because if you're going to buy a plot, it's going for around 50,000, 60,000 US dollars. Sorry, 5,000 to 6,000 US dollars. And then when you try to translate that, it's Rob, it's when you convert the currency, it's around 600,000 pula a year. It's mental. It's not affordable, and just for an empty piece of land.
Yeah, it's not affordable. Yeah, and we've seen it the world over. And funnily enough, Kyle and I were talking about the cost of living globally just before we came on camera, because there's, especially when it comes to property and land, as you've just touched on there. And I think one of the things, I watched a video the other day, and it sort of said that someone hit the nail on the head, was everybody who's in a country, whether it's you in Botswana or me here in South Africa, or we get a lot of content from America and the UK, obviously, and places like that. Everyone thinks it's a them problem. It's like, okay, there's been this investment, and now the young can't afford to buy houses and things like that. But actually, when you take a step back, you realise, and thanks to you for sharing that as well, we now realise it's happening in Botswana as well as South Africa and Namibia and the UK. And so it's not just a local problem; it's a global problem. And and again, I can speak. I'll be careful with my words here, because obviously I realise I am a foreigner in a foreign land. But foreign direct investment isn't always positive.
True.
If it is not brought. Like, I'm always personally a big believer in, if you're going to work in a country, you should move there. I've moved my poor family all around the world because I think you should commit. I think you should pay your taxes. I think you should employ people, put back into the system. But there are a lot of businesses that will fly people in, take and go. We've seen that in... certainly in Ghana, we've seen that in Zambia, certainly around the mining space. We've seen it, again, just very recently, last week, the Nigerian and UK governments were trying to do a tie-up where UK practitioners could practice law in Nigeria. And then the carrot they were dangling was, Nigerians can come to the UK. Yeah. And a journalist called me and said, what do you think? And I said, I think I agree with the president of the Nigerian Bar Association, who said, no way, because it's only going to go one way, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I said, I think I agree with him. Yeah. The UK law firms, sorry to say this, but let's be honest, they're looking to helicopter their people in, do the deal, and fly out again. They're not. I can't see that being a benefit to local Nigerian law firms at all. In fact. So I think that will run and run. So anyway, I'm mentioning a few things, but it's interesting to see what you're saying there about the price of land. And I think, the three areas you've just mentioned there in terms of improvements, yes, 100%. In terms of the number of law firms, if splintering is only going to push the price and the quality down. Yeah. If there could be some way of encouraging these firms to work together, that would be perfect. Technology, you were mentioning that as a country and as a market, it's not quick on the uptake. I often say to lawyers, and I'm sure you know this anyway as a senior lawyer, not all of the technology is good. True. But there is some that's really good. And post-COVID, we should be in a world now where things can be done remotely and can be and with good governance and good controls. So
Exactly.
it's interesting. I think you're certainly on the right lines there. I do agree with you. I think there's always sometimes in business. You know, and we're both in business, so we can speak frankly about it. There's often a bit of a rush for grabbing the money, when actually if we just took a moment to just step back a bit, the quality could be better, and therefore it will create more opportunities. But so I agree with you completely, Miles. I really, really do. I think, but it's an interesting one to see in Botswana, because you're obviously at the beginning of your journey as a country and as a market, and it's. You know, the only suggestion I think both of us would probably make to your esteemed leaders would be, just take your time. Just don't
Thank
rush.
you.
Like,
Thank you. Yeah.
just take it easy. Learn from the mistakes of others around you and just take it easy.
Exactly.
You know, because you've got South Africa to the south, which has made countless problems we won't go into on this call. And you know, let's not. And Namibia as well, who's just found oil, obviously. So let's take our time for the good of the people.
Okay.
I want to end with you. I mean, and your journey. I mean, obviously you've had a fascinating career so far. Is there anything that you've got on the horizon that you think that you might be looking to do, and anything we should be keeping an eye on in terms of you?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that, Rob. You know, one of the things, and I think this is why, as you had stated in terms of qualifications, I think the direction I'm heading was a giveaway. I decided to do that diploma in leadership and management, and then again I decided to do an executive MBA. What I'd like to do is, because I believe the law and the corporate secretarial positions have laid the foundation for me. But now, and I think there's something that you should be looking out for, Rob, is that I'd like to move more from the legal space, but more into administration, right? And I think this would bode well for me, because one day I'd love to be a CEO, Rob. I'd love to be a CEO of either a private company or a public entity. And from a regulatory and compliance field, I feel like the law has done the best it can do for me. Now, I would really love to go into more of the business administration, process improvement, and the likes. And so that's an area that I take keen interest in, because I think one of the things why we are losing, or there's such a high proliferation of young talent, is because the opportunities are there, but how do we harness the most out of this generation Y, Z, and all these millennials? That's where the gap is. And you'd have so many disgruntled employees. And Rob, I'll tell you this. That very young graduate that you're frustrating will be a leader tomorrow. And you don't want those frustrations and those inadequacies to be the characteristics of their leadership style. So I think it's about time that someone or some of us take that positive and intentional step to say, you know what, it's not just about the bottom line, but there are people that work for us. There are people that work with us. And how do we make the most out of harmonizing that relationship? And we spend 8 to 10 hours at work, Monday to Friday, if you're unfortunate, Monday to Saturday. That's basically your home. That is your
That's
home.
me.
And if it is not conducive enough for you to wake up on a Monday morning and say, you know what, I'm excited to meet Rob at the office, then we have a problem. We really have a problem. So those are one of the things that I believe with the learnings that I've got to do and the qualifications that I've got to accumulate can only give me the opportunity in future to make the most out of my intentions. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's just about what it is that I intend to do moving forward.
Well, I think you've shown me, and you will show the listeners and the watchers on YouTube as well, that you're a man who even at the early stages of his career was prepared to take a chance and to move away and to test yourself. So if you've got the eye on the prize of being a CEO one day, then you will definitely get there. I have no doubt. I remember just a little story on that for you. When my first job out of university was with a listed company, listed on the London Stock Exchange, and anyone who sees my LinkedIn will see who it is. And I happened to work in the mergers team, so we shared a floor with the executive board, and I managed to get 5 minutes before I left. I'd resigned, and I got 5 minutes with the CEO, and I had one question for him, and I said, when I'm your age, and by the way, he was probably about 41, younger than I am now, but to me he looked ancient, old, obviously. I said, when I'm your age, how do I make sure that I'm the CEO of my own company or a CEO of a leading company? And he said, get your foundations in every department: legal, operations, sales, marketing, team management, everywhere. That's what a CEO is someone who has a broad array of all those skills. And I've always remembered that conversation, and it looks like you're heading in the same way. Just on a final point, you brought up some brilliant points there, and I think the quality aspect of law is something that is really pertinent in my head, something that I really care about, that driving that improvement in quality within individuals. And I think, we have to, as an industry, often turn around and go, look, law firms wouldn't be splintering if people were getting what they wanted in that environment. Law firms wouldn't be threatened by alternative legal service providers if the client was getting what they want. And technology won't be a threat to lawyers if they continue to improve their performance, because otherwise people will clients will look elsewhere. So I'm 100% behind you on driving that quality forward. This is a fascinating journey into you and into the markets and your careers, and moving across from practice back into corporate, back again. Like I just said, we've got an impression of a professional man who is leading from the front, and it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I'm going to let you get on with your Friday and hopefully your weekend at some point. But Miles, from myself and from the listeners and the watchers who are watching on YouTube, thank you so much for your time and for the insight into the market in Gaborone as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity. And all the best with the podcast, eh? I'll be looking forward to more of these.